How's this? Okay, we're live on air. Yeah, I'm great. Yeah, I want to apologise first. I got the timings off Google, the conversion time. So yeah, pulling you out away from Aaron, but
It's no big
yeah.
deal. Aaron and I can do stuff anytime, and I first of all I want to thank you for making the donation. We're trying to support a good cause, and I'm happy to try and figure out different ways to do that. Something that doesn't necessarily require me to dye my beard pink every 6 months or something. But
No, when it was a good call. I enjoyed it. I mean, I did my little bit. They had me reading out of the Lolcats Bible. Excuse me.
ah,
Sir. Apparently, the American audience think I have quite an English voice, and so it was humorous to hear them to hear me reading out of that Bible. I haven't really prepared for this at all deliberately, but there were a couple of things I did want to talk to you about.
yeah,
Um,
your time and proposal.
okay, the first one is the issue of free will, and I've listened to you talk on it a few times, and um, you say you're a compatibilist, and that you sort of mm, almost dismiss. It seems to me that you almost dismiss it as an issue as of a so what. Now you can correct me on that if you want, but the thing I had with it is, as the majority of Christians follow a religion in which free will is the fundamental cornerstone of their religion, if we could not come up with a concrete look, free will doesn't exist, wouldn't that undermine their dogma?
So yeah, you've kind of summed up my position, which is my position. I'll admit is not incredibly well defined. I tend to agree with Dennett as a compatibilist, but I think that comes down to definitions of free will. I read Sam Harris's book and a whole bunch of other things on the topic, and what most people mean by free will is something that I think either doesn't exist or is an illusion, and largely I don't think that the subject actually matters much. Because if we have free will, okay, great, and if we don't, well, there's nothing we can do about it anyway. But when it comes to Christianity and free will, their particular version that you identify as like the cornerstone of Christianity is either something that we clearly do not have, in the sense of this libertarian free will of I can do whatever. But I think that you don't even have to have the discussion about free will to show that their idea about will is wrong and contradictory within their own scriptures. I mean, the idea of an omnipotent, omniscient being who created the universe, if he had a choice in which universe he created, and he specifically chose this particular universe in which all the actions I've ever taken and all the actions I will ever take were known to him, then under that I don't see how you can make any sort of argument for free will. And that when they talk about how much they value this idea of free will, of freely choosing God, I think they're wrong on several levels. And the first is that I'm not under the impression, and I don't think it's possible, that you choose your beliefs in any simple sense. You're either convinced of something or you're not. So I don't see, beliefs as any more of an exercise of will as my favorite flavor of ice cream. This is you're either convinced or you're not. And the other problem with this is that in many models of Christianity, they believe, when you say, well, why won't God reveal himself to us? And they claim, well, that would violate our free will. How? I don't understand how that would violate our free will, especially for those who believe that there is a Satan who, if the stories are correct, absolutely knows that there is a God and knows what he's capable of, and yet stood in opposition to him. So it's not like you would necessarily be forced to believe or forced to worship if you had this knowledge. I went way far afield of your question, though.
No, I appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, that to me is an absurdity. The whole, if you read the Bible one way, then not just Satan, but a third of the angels rebelled against somebody who knew their very thoughts and also who they knew they could not defeat.
It would seem so.
And pardon me, oh dear me. And these are the angels. They know God better than any human does, and they chose to rebel against him. To me, that doesn't augur well for the time you're going to spend in heaven.
Yeah, I'm hoping to avoid that if the story is actually true.
Yeah, I suppose what I was thinking, you know, I was just trying to figure out why you appeared quite dismissive of the free will argument, where when you know, yes, there are loads of things that we can argue against the religion, lots of contradictions, hypocrisies, and all the rest, but free will is, you know, another arrow in the quiver. And if we could say, well, prove to us free will exists, and then we'll start talking about Christianity.
Yeah. So there's first of all, there are the Calvinists who don't necessarily believe in free will anyway, and they believe in this idea of predestination, that God actually did all this. So it's not a bullet against every version of Christianity. But my particular point that I was trying to articulate is that the philosophical discussions that actual knowledgeable philosophers, let's set aside religion for the moment, the discussions that they have about free will, these are a very, very different beast from what most believers would probably describe as free will. And I think that it's enough to just, you know, it would be nice if they could demonstrate that we do in fact have free will. I agree with you there. But if you ask them the questions about what do you believe, what are the tenets of your particular version of Christianity, I think you can get almost all of them in a position where they are now advocating for something that directly contradicts their own idea of free will.
Yeah. Okay.
It's basically about showing an inconsistency in their position without having to demonstrate in reality whether we do or do not have free will. It's a problem with their model. It's kind of a reductio ad absurdum.
Yeah, I suppose my goodness, I don't know why I've got a frog in my throat. Yeah, I think I suppose you're pushing the. They're making the claim, so let's not make a claim for them to batter down beforehand.
It could be, but also it's this issue of, you know, we're using the same label to possibly refer to 2 or 3 or 4 different concepts. And if I'm going to be going head to head with a theist, I'm happy to, you know, use their definitions and their usage of terms in order to show a problem with their particular model without. It's like I have friends who will, in debates, take the positive assertion that there are no gods and defend that. And I think it can be reasonably well defended. I just don't understand why anybody would bother to do that, because the audience that you're trying to reach, you have shifted the burden of proof, and now you've placed this idea in their head, especially if they're already confused about the burden of proof, that you now have the onus to prove them wrong, rather than they having an onus to demonstrate that they're correct or reasonable.
Yeah, I think the calling yourself an atheist, I think anybody who comes into a debate with you, it's the onus is on them to determine by questioning you what you mean by atheism. The same as if I'm talking to a Christian, I want to know what type of Christian I'm talking to before I start unloading on them.
Yeah, there's, you know, for example, the Reverend Barry Lynn here in the United States is the president of Americans United for Church-State Separation. He is a, you know, committed Christian and theologian, and yet he supports church-state separation. And I think he generally opposes a lot of the fundamentalist ideas in Christianity that I'm opposed to. And I'd rather share a stage with him and work towards a good goal than some atheists I know. And I've done so.
It's uncanny that you just mentioned that, because the second topic I want to talk to you about was church-state separation, and whether perhaps that is the worst thing that the atheists could be pushing for in the US. The reason being that in all these wonderful European countries where we have state religions, the religion has died. And is it not the separation of church and state that has perhaps, you know, the old story that a nationalized industry soon goes to the wall, whereas private industry thrives? And is it not the fact of the privatization of religion in the US which has allowed it to thrive?
Yeah, no, I think that's actually a really good idea that I talked about just the other day. This idea of, if you have a state religion, well, there's less competition, and that hinders the market for religion. And as long as you have the freedom for multiple religions to attempt to thrive, they will. And also, it gives them, you know, a ready-made evil to try to oppose, which is not only all the other religions, but the fact that the state won't recognize and sanction their particular religion. This may, in fact, encourage religions to thrive, but I would add, for a time. As a matter of ideology, I am and always will be, and unless there's just some crazy evidence to the contrary, a huge proponent of church-state separation, because it's what allows individuals the freedom to oppose religions, without any extra codification of different laws and statutes to let people do that. And so I think that in the case of European countries, where they have a much more impressive history and a lot of lessons learned that our young kind of punk ass country simply hasn't learned. I mean, we're a scrappy band of rebels who tried this Enlightenment era, idea of, hey, let's let everybody worship and do whatever they want, and then we become a world superpower and incredibly prosperous, and we are basically the spoiled brats of the planet. But that doesn't mean that the ideals are wrong. And I think that church-state separation, and is properly enforced, and that's a problem in the United States, is, I think, one of my most near perfect goals, because I can't get into people's heads, and I can't change, and I wouldn't want to force them to stop believing stuff. And so, while I'm not all about the free market in every environment, I think that the solution to bad speech is better speech, and the solution to ignorance is education. And I'm not sure how much there's no guarantee that you can do that if you have a state religion.
But I don't know, do you not find it absurd that in America it's almost impossible to take office unless you're a Christian, and you have supposedly a separation of church and state? And whereas in most European countries where you have a state religion, atheists abound in, the legislature.
So I think we're kind of comparing apples and oranges there, because in the areas that, as far as I'm aware of, where atheists have no problem getting elected, it's because religion has already taken a back seat. It's not like when these religions were the state religion and at the height of their popularity, that you were necessarily going to see a lot of godless heathens taking office. In our situation in the United States, first of all, we're improving the situation so that more and more for lack of a better word, atheists can be elected. And for the first time ever, we had a poll that said that more than 50% of the population would vote for president an atheist. Assuming all other qualifications were equal, they would not disqualify an atheist. But the thing is that church-state separation doesn't have anything to do with the criteria by which individuals voters make their decision. They could just decide, oh, I don't like him because he's got a mustache, or because he's bald, or because she's, a little too chunky, or a little too shapely, or whatever. They can maybe they said something in an interview where they said nuclear instead of nuclear, and that's enough for them to not vote for him. I don't get to choose the criteria upon which people will vote. So it's this thing about who's going to be elected is about changing minds with respect to who these people are, and not so much about church-state separation.
No, that's a good point, I suppose. And I mean, if you just take a direct comparison of the US and the UK, I suppose you could almost say that the US is about 100 years behind the UK with regard to religion. I mean, it was, I think, around about 130 years ago that we had an MP imprisoned in St. Stephen's Tower, which is Big Ben, because he refused to swear an oath to the Queen on the Bible. So, I mean, I know the US isn't there, but yeah, maybe that's what it is. Maybe you have 4 generations that are going to have to pass before the mindset of the US gets to where the mindset of the UK is.
Yeah, I think there may be something to that. We're doing a good job of reaching people, the unaffiliated, the nuns, the atheists, the freethinkers, secular humanists. That's on the rise. We've got a long way to go, and there are many different paths to this, and it may be that The UK, for example, is taking one path and we're taking another, and we just can't do a proper comparison at this point. But I certainly do. I mean, when people talk about this, you know, do you think having a state religion would be a good way to eliminate religion? Well, I certainly agree that it's a good way of eliminating all the others. But for every, you know, Great Britain that we can point to, there's also a Saudi Arabia, and I don't think I would want to be living there, or Iraq, or any of the other places that have a state religion that doesn't currently value freedoms.
Yeah, I suppose that's the answer. You don't really want a United States of Fox News, do you?
Yeah, definitely not.
No. Okay. On the question of fighting the good fight, I mean, you have a straightforward approach whereby people call into you and you ask them to defend their belief, which is fine. But obviously, YouTube, which is the format I'm on, and many of my subscribers, or all my subscribers are on, obviously, but many of them make videos. They're not in that asking the questions. They're having to pose the positions. And so I suppose the question is, in your mind, I know there's many different approaches for different people, but what do you think is the most effective approach, or what approach do you not like to see?
I couldn't tell you what's the most effective. All I can tell you is that I know that my approach has been effective, and I know that other approaches have been effective, and generally I think that in much the same way that people come to religion for different reasons, and people stay in religion for what I think is probably even wider variety of reasons, and people are going to find their way out of religion for different reasons. Some of it has to do with personality. I might say this, you know, you and I might have a conversation with somebody. We might say exactly the same thing in slightly different ways, and one time it registers and one time it doesn't. And there are some people who are not going to even think about what you say if you seem to be, you know, outraged or indignant. If you seem to be hostile to the ideas, they will take it as hostile to them. And there are others who I think have been placated into this, let's just agree to disagree, and we all have our different views, and it takes something a little more forceful and a little more shocking to get them to actually pay attention. So when we start talking about, you know, tone and style, and whether the firebrands are more effective than the diplomats, my answer's been pretty consistent, and that's that I think that there's room for all of them, and the only thing that I'm generally opposed to is one group telling another group that their way of doing it is wrong or worse, unless they can actually support that with evidence. And if you can't, I don't know too many firebrands, for example, who are running around telling diplomats to stop being nice to theists. But I could probably name several, I won't, but who generally identify as diplomats who are running around telling the firebrands that they're doing it wrong. And they have absolutely nothing beyond their personal preference and experience with which to back that up. So I'm for all approaches, as long as we focus on the ideas and not on trashing people.
Yeah, okay. The other thing, of course, I get the feeling is that perhaps the thing we lack is offering something to replace those things they get from their religion. Not just the sense of community and the sense of belonging, but obviously, well, I don't think you're going to touch the ones who are getting euphoric on a regular basis. But you know, they do get a sense of community. You know, church is a part of their lives, and atheism seems to offer them a hole to replace that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's, you know, we're doing. I think there's a lot of groups that are focused on this. You're seeing more of the, like, Sunday assembly things. For some people, when they leave religion, and by the way, not everybody, you know, in our community is necessarily leaving religion. Russell's a fourth generation atheist and his son's a fifth. But for the people leaving religion, they potentially have lost their entire social networks. In some cases, they've lost family. There are things that they appreciated about attending church and that sort of thing that I think some of these groups are now providing them, and that's fine. If it's for you, it's for you. If it's not for you, then don't go. But everybody's going to be a little bit different. The areas where we have lagged behind, at least in the United States, relate more to dealing with issues of grief and dealing with charitable efforts. I think are aspects of religious life that some people value that have been lacking in the atheist community. And part of that is because religions, at least in the United States, has had this immensely privileged position that it's sat in, where it's tax exempt and it's got a built-in infrastructure, and you can mobilize because you're this top-down dogmatic. Your preacher gets up there, and even though he's not supposed to, he can either directly or indirectly tell you who to vote for, or tell you that you're going to meet over here, on Saturday and hand out food and all this stuff. It serves as a good motivator. We not only don't necessarily have that good motivator. I think the best we can do, and I think it should be good enough, is to appeal to humanism and the fact that we're all stuck sharing the same planet, and what kind of world would you prefer to live in as a motivator. But we haven't had that privileged position, so we're not quite up to speed, but we're doing better. There's the Foundation Beyond Belief, there's SHARE, those are both secular charities, and now there's Grief Beyond Belief. There's also the Therapist Project and Recovering from Religion. These organizations are recognizing some of the difficulties that people leaving religion have had and doing what they can to meet it. But one of the other things that I think we need to do with regard to educating is, people asked, and I'm stealing this partially from Dennis Loubet from the nonprofits. He and I were having a discussion, and somebody had asked, well, what do you replace religion with when it's gone? And Dennis said, well, what do you replace cancer with when it's gone? If you're going to review religion generally as something that is harmful, and the fact that it's not true, then you've replaced it with reality, and you've replaced it with freedom, and you've replaced it, with the fact that you're no longer in servitude to some false concept that's going, a sky daddy that's going to watch your every move, or has dictated your every move, or has planned out your entire life. I mean, you've replaced it with freedom, and getting people to recognize this, that they haven't actually lost something, they've gained something, is something I think we need to spend more time on. Several years ago, I gave the example that if you had been told that you were going to inherit $1 billion on your 21st birthday, and you found that you got to your 21st birthday and there was no $1 billion, well, you have two options at that point. You can sit around and be depressed and flail and rage against the missing money, or you can realize that you never had that money, you were never going to have that money, that you were duped, and then work to make sure that others aren't duped, and that you live the best life you can absent that $1 billion.
Isn't there also a problem that the church, because of the dogmatism, and they are able to guilt a gullible congregation into donating, into following them, into reacting to the Hurricane Katrinas of this world, whereas within the, I was going to say the words atheist community, within the atheist community, what you've actually got is a lot of angry cats that are impossible to herd, and when anybody does put themselves up as a spoke, I mean, even yourself, you must get the mail. As soon as somebody looks like they might be working their way towards the top of the pyramid, they may be wanting to become a spokesman, they're attacked from all sides by these free-thinking atheists who, and isn't that going to be an ongoing problem for the atheist group when it tries to mobilize itself?
Yeah, I think so, and I also think that a lot of the other little divisions and arguments that we have, these are inevitable. They are part of the fact that we're going through growing pains. Once upon a time, we were small enough that you had a handful of basically bearded older white men talking about just religion, and now we're building communities, and we recognize that, okay, we've gotten rid of this God concept in our own lives, but we have to keep continuing. Some of us are going to rely on, for example, secular humanism, but I care about this, and you care about that, and we care about these other things. Where is the overlap outside of just, hey, I don't believe in a God, and you don't believe in a God? And I think that there are organizations and groups that will never move beyond, this is our one thing. We are in opposition to the privileged position of religion, or we are here to educate people to help them free themselves from religion and superstition. And there are other groups that will go a step further and say, in addition to that, we're supporting church-state separation, and because of that, we think we support, these, or we will support these particular ideas as well, which we think are derived from it. And I don't think that we're really cats unable to be herded. I think that for the people who've been duped in the past, atheists are reluctant to give money because it seems too much like the offering plate. Atheists are reluctant, and freethinkers are reluctant to rally behind an individual. Very often, on occasion they will, for fear that it will become too much of a cult of personality, too much of a top-down structure. And I understand that. And, I've got, 30,000 followers on Twitter. And I've said many times, I appreciate the support, but if you're in the position where you're believing something because I said so, you've gone from one mistake to another. If you're taking action merely because I said so, or merely because I asked you to, rather than that you recognize that there's a good reason to support CampQuest, or there's a good reason to support the Secular Student Alliance, and that you want to actually make positive contributions to a world, that these are your values, if you're doing it because somebody said so, you've just compounded the mistake. And it's one of the reasons why I don't ever want to legislate people's religious beliefs away. I want them to give them up on their own. I don't want them to give it up for good reasons. So the struggles that we have that you were asking about with how do you get people to contribute and to be a part of the process without ending up looking similar to the top-down organizations. And the answer is, you may not be as effective at it, but I think in the end it'll be more rewarding. It's a longer slog that we have to take, I think, than most people realize. But in the end, I'm optimistic that it'll have been worth it. But, sometimes you have to learn the lessons the hard way, I guess.
Yeah, I suppose, I'm thinking of the issues because, as you say, it's a atheist community, if you want, but it's why I'm thinking of the things like Atheism Plus and the feminists with the free thought blogs, and why that causes so much contention, because people will shout, I'm an atheist, I don't want to do this and this and this, where if you think about it rationally with a skeptical mind, then the things that bring you to atheism should also bring you to feminism and should bring you to these other things as well. And you should call yourself probably a humanist, even though you're interacting as an atheist at any particular time. But when you're having your organizations with atheist or atheism in the name, then it doesn't dirty the water for people joining when they're thinking, hang on, I joined this, I didn't join this, or
There's often concern about mission drift. The atheist community of Austin, which I was president of for about 7 years or so, and we had a list of position statements. Our charter specifically had us support church-state separation, and we derived a handful of positions from church-state separation based on the sorts of things that religion was the prime motivator to oppose. Things like, marriage equality and reproductive rights and proper science education, things like that, where religion was intruding. And one of the things is that for years, the ACA, Atheist Community of Austin, didn't have any position statements, and yet they still did blood drives, street cleanup, all of these things that nobody ever complained about. In all the time that they were doing all of these things, nobody ever said, hey, why are you cleaning streets, or why are you donating blood? This is mission drift. You should be focused only on this God question. Why are you doing these other things? And it wasn't until certain groups started getting more involved in talking about social justice issues that they were convinced were derived from church-state separation issues, that people started complaining. And the curious thing is that, yes, you can be an atheist and not care about any of those issues. As a matter of fact, you can be an atheist and not support church-state separation, as we go back to the potential arguments from the top of our call. But this isn't the view. The reason why there was such a backlash, I think, is because people viewed some of the things that were done on behalf of Atheism Plus or whatever as if it were an attempt to change atheism and the atheist community so that it would all necessarily be like that rather than a subset like that, which, you know, I supported Atheism Plus and the values of Atheism Plus, working towards social justice and equality, and I still do. I supported those values long before there was ever any kind of name for it. Now, I don't know if there's anything called Atheism Plus that actually still exists that people are doing other than a forum, but a forum isn't a movement. And I think there was a lot of just kind of fear-mongering and reactionary stuff from all sides of, oh, they're trying to make us do this, and oh, you're just, you know, terrible people. And we ended up, you know, kind of dividing even on things we might not disagree about. And that's been kind of frustrating. That's the growing pains that I was talking about.
Well, yeah, I think what you say is very important, that if you're an atheist, especially if you've just come out as an atheist, you want a support group, you want other people out there, you want to know who they are, and you probably want to do things. You want to be good without God, and you want to do things to show that you are. You want to help the community, etc. But if you're going to do something and people say, why are you doing this? We're doing this because we don't believe in God, is not a really good rallying cry. Whereas we're doing this because we believe in the separation of church and state, because we believe in racial equality, equality of the sexes, equality, you know, regardless of sexuality, then they're positives as opposed to the negative of we don't believe in God. But as you say, as soon as you do that, there is a danger that there may be people with a specific agenda who try to wedge into what you're doing. But I mean, I'm thinking of Mensa. Mensa has SIGs, special interest groups.
Mm-hmm.
And perhaps, you know, as the organization grows in the US, perhaps that's something that could be thought about, that within the atheist community, you have special interest groups, people who are specifically affected or want to put their efforts into a specific area within the atheist umbrella, but they're within a SIG of whatever it is.
Yeah, I think we're starting to see some of that, because first of all, there are different types of groups. You know, American Atheists is a different type of group than the individual communities and even some of the other global or national communities or organizations, if that's preferred. I tried to encourage folks in the atheist community of Austin to do whatever they wanted to. We had roller skating night, we had board game night, we'd have movie night. We had a craft night where if you wanted to get together with a whole bunch of other people who did crafts, whether it was painting or knitting or whatever, we did that. None of that has anything to do with atheism or religion or church-state separation or anything. It has to do with being human. And one of the things that we need to recognize is that we have these different interests. But if you just tried to go join a knitting group, the odds of you finding a knitting group where you were going to be comfortable as an atheist around people who were probably going to be talking about, you know, oh, we did this at church, and, you know, isn't Jesus wonderful, and, you know, God has really been convicting me and stuff like those conversations are common even amongst people who aren't rabid fundamentalists. Religious conversations for the religious have become filler into other activities, and we have a community of people who have felt ostracized, who have been sitting in the corner at family gatherings afraid to open their mouth, who have tried to join events and socialize with people, and they don't necessarily want to go to the skeptics in the pub, let's sit around and bash religion night or talk about how silly people are for believing in alien abduction stories or whatever else. They want to engage in this activity that is something they like, but they want to do it without the religious baggage. And so something like the Mensa Special Interest Groups, something like having subgroups or smaller organizations that cater more to specific needs, not only can I not object to that, I strongly encourage it, and I think that's what we're unavoidably moving towards. I think part of the problem was that people saw what are probably best described as special interest subgroups as if they were trying to take over the entire movement and dictate what everybody else had to believe, when that was never anything, it certainly wasn't anything I would support. And the people that I know and worked with on some things, that wasn't their goal, even when people portrayed it as their goal. So I think we just need to recognize that we're a growing movement with a plurality of opinions on different things and interests, and you do and support the things that you feel like doing and supporting, and maybe not sit around, trashing everybody. I think if there was an atheist Bieber subgroup, maybe I could get behind trash talking him a little bit, but to each their own.
Yeah, I think you learn as soon as you put yourself out there that we are driven by emotion, and of course the YouTube generation, you don't have that hesitation where you have time to ponder before you hit return and your comment's gone. But emotion's good, because we wouldn't have evolved as we are as a society, and we wouldn't have evolved technologically if emotion hadn't driven us. But I think emotions are what allow the reason to take a back seat for a little while. But I've had you on way past your half hour, so
well, I'll give you one last question if you want, because I'm enjoying it, and I kind of made you wait while I restarted. So if you got one last thing for us to hit.
Well, yeah. What are you talking to Aaron about? What's your podcast about tonight?
Oh, great. That's really good spinning. So there's one thing that, like I said, I pick anybody in the atheist community, and I have disagreed with them about something, and I think that that's normal. And what I care more about is how they handle the disagreement, how we can have the conversation, even if we ultimately don't change each other's minds. What's the reaction? And I mentioned this the other day while I was live streaming a game, that I disagreed with Aaron and PZ and you name it, I've disagreed. And immediately somebody said, "What did you disagree with Aaron about?" Because we have similar pools of people watching both of us. And I explained that Aaron thinks that Ray Comfort is lying, and I think that Ray Comfort is sincere when he talks about what he believes. And so there may be some subtle distinctions about what we each mean by lying and about what we're referring to. And he's down visiting me for the weekend and for his anniversary. And we started talking about it in the car last night, and he said, "Let's do this, tomorrow." So we're going to record probably 20 or 30 minutes of us discussing not necessarily just Ray Comfort, but this issue of what does it take before you're justified in making a declaration about somebody's motivations and inner thoughts, which is my primary objection to people doing that. Because Ray might be lying, but I can't demonstrate that he's lying. And all I need to demonstrate is that he's wrong, or that he has no good reason for anyone to think that he's right. I don't need to, much the same way that I view incompetence as a more likely explanation than, a conspiracy. I think a mistake in thinking, a sincere one, especially with the protective mechanisms of religion surrounding it, is a much better explanation for the apparent cognitive dissonance than that someone is a fraud and is just lying for, I don't know, popularity or money or whatever.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I'd love to hear that, because my position is I think Ray is lying, but I think he believes his lies are truth. I think he's done that flip in his head, which propaganda does. And
that's going to be this. Your comment so mirrors what Arne and I were talking about earlier. So you'll probably enjoy this. It's going to be, we're going to be hopefully focusing on that particular detail at some point about someone could be lying about the facts but still be telling the truth about what they believe about the facts, and so there's kind of a meta level to it. But I'm looking forward to it.
So when's the podcast going out?
I don't really know. I'm doing this for Aaron. He's starting a new podcast. His Patreon's taken off and doing well, and one of the commitments was to start a podcast. I don't have all the details on it, but they're doing some kind of 30-minute podcast with 3 10-minute sections. So we'll record some footage and he'll edit it together, and I can't really say when it's going to be out. I will say, though, that we did some work on my Patreon, and that'll be going live probably in a couple days. I've still got to record the intro video for it, but all the Patreon stuff is set up. So
I look forward to it. Okay, well, thank you very much. It's been a very great pleasure speaking to you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it, and thanks for your generous donation to Engineers Without Borders. That was great.
Okay. Bye for now.